Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Amiya Kumar Das, associated with the Department of Sociology, Tezpur University. Today, in this session, we will discuss ideas and concepts of Anibal Quijano as a part of contemporary social theory. As we have discussed elsewhere in various other sessions, that how the whole idea concept of modernity and modernization has been critiqued by various sociologists and scholars inside and outside the Western world. Similarly, many theorists, social scientists in the context of Latin America, they have vehemently critiqued the whole idea, encompassing idea of modernity. So here in this session, mostly we will focus and discuss on Anibal Quijano's idea and his contemporaries and others who have contributed similar ideas and concepts. The idea of race is surely the most efficient instrument of social domination produced in the last 500 years. Dating from the very beginning of the formation of the Americas and of capitalism at the turn of the 16th century, in the ensuing century, it was imposed on the population of the whole planet as an aspect of European colonial domination. That is what Anibal Quijano argues. Anibal Quijano is a Peruvian theoretician of decolonial perspective and has contributed immensely to the field of post-colonial studies and critical theory. He engages modernity as an episteme through the conceptual category of coloniality of power. According to Arias, he is the first scholar to introduce the concept of coloniality in the year 1989. Quijano is part of a larger community of scholars who have been interrogating the concept of modernity in the context of Latin America. Latin American scholars critically engaged with modernity to historicize the geopolitical developments that have led to the conquest of Latin America. This helped them to understand the processes of social change in their region. Structures of power initiated by the process of colonization are the subject of study and analysis by Anibal Quijano. So, this module is taking ahead few interrogation raised and few theorists, those who have been engaged with the ideas on this European or Western modernity. Similarly, Anibal Quijano, he has engaged himself critically with the concept and idea of Western modernity, which tries to encapsulate other forms of knowledge system which has emerged in various parts of the world. What is decoloniality? The term decolonialization of social theory needs to be clarified before any further elaboration. Decoloniality has been called a form of epistemic disobedience, epistemic delinking, and epistemic reconstruction. In this sense, decolonial thinking is the recognition and implementation of a border gnosis or subaltern reason, a means of eliminating the provincial tendency to pretend that Western European modes of thinking are in fact universal ones. In its less theoretical and more practical applications, such as movements for indigenous autonomy, like Zapatista self-government, decoloniality is called a programmatic of delinking from contemporary legacies of coloniality, a response to needs unmet by the modern rightist or leftist governments, or most broadly, social movements in search of new humanity, or the search for a social liberation from all power organized as inequality, discrimination, exploitation, and domination. According to Arturo Escobar, Anibal Quijano Enrique Dussel, and Walter Mignolo are the main intellectual sources of these Latin American intellectual landscapes. Unlike that European understanding of modernity, in Latin American context, they question the social, cultural, political, and historical underpinnings and its relations with the modernity. They try to engage themselves critically with this whole notion of European modernity. In this context, Arturo Escobar, he delineates few points in what ways it has been engaged and countered to the whole idea of modernity. The first thing is that to look at how in a specific historical context, in European context, modernity has been created and engaged itself with other form of social reality which is different in the Latin American context. Another aspect is all about the economy. How the global capital system is a part of modernity has encroached other forms, other lives, other regions and tried to establish its dominance and create consumerism. Through that global capital system, they have exploited and plundered other regions. Another form is that the intellectual landscape. How through this modern knowledge system or these practices, they could influence others in the other parts. So that they, including Anibal Quijano, Arturo Escobar, and philosopher and social scientist and sociologist from this Latin American region, they try to establish a form of knowledge system which is not influenced or guided by the Western knowledge system which is part of the creation of this modernity, so that they can come up with a different form, different methods, different understanding which will eventually help them in understanding their social reality in a much better way. If you look at again Anibal Quijano, he is seriously engaging himself with the questions of colonization. He says modernity, we cannot see it in isolation. It is a serious part of colonization process. So decolonization, decoloniality is the concept he is trying to use here. Through this only, that tool, we can free ourselves and we can offer a serious critique to the whole idea of this Western or European notion of modernity or this, for that matter, knowledge creation. So Anibal Quijano emphasizes here is all about the difference between the dominator and dominated as it spelled out in the matrix of race. Race is very important category here. In what aspect? They projected, the colonizers projected races as different. Prior to the colonization of Americas, there were no such hierarchy or differentiation, according to Quijano, in the Latin American context, that people were not differentiated and discriminated on the basis of race. After the colonization of Americas or the colonization of the peripheries, the race was a very important category to distinguish, demarcate, differentiate and hierarchize this population into two categories. One is superior, another one is inferior. On the basis of these two binaries, we could see that how over the period, white Europeans, the Western, they tried to subjugate the people in the other part of the world. Like as if it is their duty, morality and responsibility to take care of this black or the brown. It is more often referred as the white man's burden or white man's responsibility or white man's duty. In this civilizational missionary aspect, what happened? It created a kind of inferiority among these people. Even it created hierarchy both between the colonizers and the colonized, and among the colonized also it created a particular differences where it created cleavages in the particular society of the superiority and inferiority. Another point which he is trying to emphasize is on the capital. How this global capital, because of the penetration of the capitalism, it tried to exploit through cheap labor. So cheap labor is created in the periphery, and these raw materials and other things were taken from this periphery, and with the help of cheap labor and raw materials, the finished product, end product is produced with the high cost. And again, when it comes to the periphery, they buy back their own surplus. It's a contradiction. It's a big contradiction where this Latin America, South Asia, African nation and country, they have suffered through a long time. So this kind of contradiction through the race, through the capital, through labor, it has created a very difficult situation. That is what Anibal Quijano is discussing in his whole argument. So it is very difficult, and it will not be possible to look at the Eurocentrism without attaching it to this hegemonic power, which bring and collect various forms of knowledge with it and try to form and try to showcase itself as a only form of knowledge which is superior than others. So how it suggests? It says by creating two kinds of myth. Anibal Quijano says that this Europe-centric idea or the Eurocentric civilization process, they say they have differentiated, the civilization is differentiated from the original human nature, and it started and progressed and developed only in the European context. That is number one. And number two, that where only by when these people of this margin or other places, they will follow this developmental path of Europe, then only they can also catch up with this European world and they can be developed. Through this idea, what Quijano says that the production of knowledge from a Eurocentric perspective has led to distortion of the reality, and in a later piece, he elaborates his findings with this idea of coloniality. Coloniality of power as a heuristic device to reconstruct not only our modes of knowledge but also the world around us finds its fuller statement in that work which he describes in his seminal articles. He tries to argue that this birth of the new nation states in America, Asia, Africa, coloniality permeated the new nation states in the form of hierarchies, identities, value systems and knowledge systems used to understand and reflect on social realities. So what he says that the kind of binaries, the kind of values based, judgment based concepts were created in the margins or peripheries through this coloniality, even though this colonization is over by the colonizers, the colonized continue with that set of mind because of this concept, what he has developed, that coloniality. It is still going on. It's a continuous process. It is very difficult to decolonize ourselves, to free ourselves, to render ourselves free from that colonial baggages and bondages. That is the main argument here Anibal Quijano is trying to make. Quijano illustrates the process of domination and Eurocentrification of the global order. He points out few aspects of this through his opinion. These are political domination necessitated clarification and understanding of colonial subjects. Colonial structure of power created social categories centered on racial divisions. Racial categorization was done on biological grounds, and a sense of superiority and inferiority was constructed. Division of labor was organized along racial lines. These constructions were seen as objective and scientific, thereby legitimized the colonial domination. Construction of categories and knowledge were European in orientation, thereby Eurocentric forms of knowledge was created. Political and economic domination enabled European knowledge system to emerge as hegemonic discourse. European knowledge systems and ways of life were made aspirational by controlling to access them. Political, military, and technological power were used to impose culturally superiority or cultural colonialism over the dominated cultures. History was conceived as a linear movement from primitive to advanced capitalist society, with Europe presenting the future and the colonies presenting the past Europe. Capitalism and modernity, they are having an inherent relationship with each other. Anibal Quijano describes it in form of this wage labor, how labor is attached to the process of capitalism. He says, as he has already discussed on the issue of race, how race constitutes an important category in the context of colonization process, where it is the beginning of these Western countries or the Europeans where they started colonizing through the military power, through trade, through politics, and through other forms of cleverly procedures. They tried to establish their hegemony and domination over these Latin American countries and other South Asian and African countries. So, this wage difference is used in the sense that these colonizers or the white race, they were eligible to earn wage in the capitalist system, whereas these non-whites or the other, they were subject to various forms of exploitation in the form of slavery and other form of servants kind of thing, where they were made to work hard but without any kind of payment. This system clearly shows that how this whole approach of modernity, which is captured and which is having a kind of strong relationship with the capitalist system, where it differentiates on the basis of the race. So, this is the crisis of modernity. As we have seen in other discussions, other sessions, other modules, it claims that modernity has been attached with the idea of liberty, freedom, rationality, democracy, and individualism, which helps to create a better society. Rather, it has given a different form altogether. It has created difference, it has created hierarchy, it has created violence, it has created differentiation and other form of exploitation. So, to elaborate on Anibal Quijano's idea, he gives another three important aspects to his discussion. While integration of labor and capital from diverse settings had a major implication in terms of the integration of different societies with that of European sensibilities and orientations, the hegemony of Europe, exercised through its coloniality of power, operated at multiple levels. These are: cultural artifacts of the colonized people were discovered by the colonists, and those that were found suitable for the capitalist development were appropriated. Knowledge production, cultural expression, and subjective formations of the colonized people that were not in tandem with the forms of knowledge production, cultural metrics, and subjectivities of the European colonizers were repressed. Colonized people were forced to learn the dominant culture to aid, establish, and consolidate the capitalist form of production, and thereby making Europe the center of capitalist world possible. Decolonization of theory, understanding epistemic reconstitutions. Quijano, after illustrating various ways in which colonial power has been reproducing itself after the demise of colonial political domination, makes a call for the decolonization of theory. In fact, he urges the following: it is necessary to extricate oneself from the linkages between rationality, modernity, and coloniality. First of all, and definitely from all power which is not constituted by free decisions made by free people. So, in this argument, he says that coloniality is a kind of process through which we are still attached to the colonizers, their propaganda, their agenda, and their mind. To be free, we need to think free according to our own position. Displacement of coloniality is seen as an epistemological decolonization wherein the universality of particular is replaced by the choice of people in terms of orientations, freedom to criticize, intercultural communications, and other things. So, Quijano imagines the possibility of the liberation potential of modernity from the colonial matrix of power. Thrust of his epistemic move is to decenter the experiences of Europe and vision of the society from Eurocentrism. So, it is pointed out that outside the West, differences within a totality society is acknowledged as heterogeneity and is seen as irreducible. This heterogeneity is seen as a diversity which is constitutive of the totality. This diversity is not seen in hierarchical scale. Hence, he argues for liberation of intercultural relations from the prison of coloniality. In this context of decolonization of the theory, it is pertinent to recall Quijano's argument on indigenous movements. So, he tries to constitute a program whereby it's, as we have earlier also mentioned, that is a kind of program to decolonize oneself from this process of coloniality where we are still attached to this colonized power. They create hierarchy, they create imbalance to show that somebody is superior and somebody is inferior. In this context, we have seen that there are many other possibilities which have been argued by many scholars, especially social scientists from the other world, non-Western world, to have more what we can call it as a kind of prosperous or effective tool we should develop to combat this form of modernization process, which is through its colonial power, colonialism, many other countries, non-Western countries were subjugated and captured. According to Quijano, it is the contemporary expression of coloniality of power in ex-colonial countries. Coloniality present itself in the contemporary societies in following manner. These are: race is a category of social classification, control and exploitation of labor within a single historical process of capitalist production mechanism, Eurocentrism in production processes and knowledge production, creation of nation states with colonial form of relations in society. It is in this context that we have a non-convergence of nation, identity and democracy, that we have indigenous movements like the Chiapas Revolution of 1994. So, what is the way forward? It is argued that the indigenous problem thus become an authentic political and theoretical irritant in Latin America. In order to resolve it, simultaneous changes would be required in three independent dimensions. These are: decolonizing of political relations within the state, the radical undermining of conditions of exploitation and the end of servitude. As preconditions and point of departure, the decolonization of relations of social domination. So, if we look at the whole module, we can summarize that Anibal Quijano is vehemently trying to establish a practice, create a program whereby scholars from independent countries can come together in a common platform to have a kind of network we establish and go for a stronger critique to the Western notion of modernity. The Eurocentric worldview which has been created to confuse people or to give a different color to their worldviews and understanding has created mass confusion. Thereby, through various concepts like academic dependency, captive mind and other forms of criticism which has been given by various scholars in the context of Latin America, South Asia and Africa, we can see that this coloniality is a very subtle form. It works in a very subtle form, and it's a hegemonic form. It is, even if it is not manifested in various concrete form after this colonization process is over, it is still attached to various practices, thereby people are engaged in the practice of teaching, research, or any other form of knowledge production. We are still under the influence of colonialism. That is where Anibal Quijano vehemently, strongly argues for a process of decolonization, and he gives various examples. He gives us various kind of suggestions what we have discussed in this module to come out of that framework, to come out of that prison, and he has discussed in extensively the process of coloniality in his own terms, giving examples from this non-Western part and how we can combat it. For further information, please log on to the EPG Pathshala website where you have more readings and references. Thank you.